There's something strange that happens to people as they get older. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just slowly, quietly. One day, you look around at the life you spent decades building and realize you barely remember living inside it. The promotions came. The bills got paid. The house got bigger. But somehow, the conversations became shorter. The laughter faded faster, and the people you loved most slowly learned how to live without you. That's the dangerous thing about chasing success. Sometimes, you don't notice what it's costing you until the silence finally arrives. Tonight's story isn't about a millionaire. It isn't about business. And it isn't really about money at all. It's about a man who spent his entire life trying to protect his family from struggle, only to realize he accidentally became absent from the very life he was trying to build. And honestly, there's a good chance parts of this story might feel uncomfortably familiar. So wherever you are tonight, maybe slow down for a moment and listen carefully to the story of Thomas Bennett, a man who had almost everything people spend their lives chasing, and still ate dinner alone. The older Thomas Bennett got, the more expensive his life became, and the emptier it felt. At 58, he owned a beautiful house outside Portland, 2 luxury cars, and a watch collection he barely wore anymore. His company had done well. People respected him. Younger men asked him for business advice over steak dinners and expensive whiskey. But every night, around 11:30, after the dishes were done and the television hummed quietly in the background, Thomas would sit alone at the kitchen table and stare at the same thing, the empty chair across from him. It had been empty for almost 3 years. Not because someone died, because someone finally stopped waiting for him. And strangely, that hurt even more. There's a particular kind of loneliness that doesn't arrive dramatically. It comes quietly. In unopened photo albums, in birthdays missed because of meetings, in hearing your grown daughter laugh with someone else on the phone and realizing she no longer calls you first. Thomas didn't notice it happening while he was building his life. Most people don't. And that's what makes this story matter, because sometimes the real meaning of wealth only becomes visible after you've spent years chasing the wrong thing. Thomas Bennett grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood in Ohio. His father worked at a steel plant for 32 years. His mother cleaned motel rooms on weekends to help pay bills. Money was always tight, but the house carried a strange kind of warmth. The television was old. The carpet smelled faintly of cigarettes and laundry soap. Winters were cold enough that ice formed on the corners of the windows. But every Friday night, his father brought home a pepperoni pizza, and they ate together at the kitchen table while old jazz records played softly in the background. Thomas remembered those nights more clearly than any expensive dinner he'd had later in life. Back then, he promised himself something. One day, he would make enough money so his family would never struggle again. And for a long time, that promise felt noble. He worked harder than everyone else. Community college, night classes, sales jobs, long drives across states in cheap motel rooms. He learned how to speak confidently even when exhausted, learned how to smile through stress, learned how to become useful to powerful people. By 42, he had built a successful logistics company. By 48, he barely slept. His wife, Eleanor, used to wait up for him at night. At first, she'd leave dinner in the oven. Then eventually, she stopped cooking late altogether. Not out of anger, out of adaptation. That's the thing about emotional distance. It rarely begins with screaming. It begins with adjustment. "You missed Lucy's piano recital again," Eleanor said one evening without looking up from the sink. Thomas loosened his tie. "I told you the client dinner ran late. She looked for you the whole time. I'm doing this for the family." Eleanor finally turned around. Her expression wasn't furious. That would have been easier. She just looked tired. "She doesn't need a provider tonight," she said quietly. She needed her dad. Thomas hated conversations like that, not because Eleanor was wrong, because some part of him knew she was right. But he buried that feeling quickly. The same way he buried most things. Work gave him measurable rewards. Home gave him emotions he didn't know how to manage. So he kept choosing work. Years passed that way. Lucy grew older. Eleanor became quieter. The house became bigger. Ironically, the bigger the house became, the less anyone seemed to gather inside it. Thomas noticed strange details sometimes. The way his daughter stopped telling him stories voluntarily. The way family dinners became shorter. The way silence settled naturally between him and Eleanor during car rides. But life was moving fast, and success has a dangerous way of disguising loss while it's happening. Then came the Tuesday afternoon that changed everything. Thomas had flown back early from Chicago after a meeting got canceled. When he pulled into the driveway, Eleanor's car was already there. Inside the house, it was unusually quiet. No television, no music, just a distant sound of tape being pulled from cardboard boxes. He walked upstairs slowly. Eleanor was in the bedroom, folding clothes into a suitcase. For a moment, Thomas genuinely thought she was preparing for a trip. "Where are you going?" Ask it. Eleanor paused, then continued folding. "I rented a small apartment downtown." Thomas laughed softly in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" She zipped the suitcase halfway. "I can't do this anymore." The room suddenly felt smaller. What does that even mean? Eleanor sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, and when she finally looked at him, Thomas saw something that unsettled him more than anger ever could. Acceptance. "I spent 27 years waiting for your life to slow down enough for us to exist inside it," she said. "It never did." "That's ridiculous. Everything I built was for this family." "No," she replied gently. "You built it for the fear you carried from being poor." The words hit harder than shouting, because they sounded true. Thomas wanted to argue, wanted to defend himself. Wanted to list sacrifices and mortgage payments and college tuition and all the practical ways he had loved them. But suddenly, those things felt strangely incomplete. Eleanor stood and placed her wedding ring carefully on the dresser. "I know you loved us," she whispered. "I just don't think you knew how to be with us." Then she walked past him, and for the first time in his adult life, Thomas stood completely still with nothing left to accomplish. The months afterward were brutal. Not dramatically brutal. Quietly brutal. He still went to work. Still attended meetings. Still wore expensive suits. But the performance no longer felt convincing. At night, the silence inside the house became unbearable. He began eating dinner, standing over the sink. The television stayed on simply to make the rooms feel occupied. One Sunday morning, Thomas found himself driving aimlessly through town before sunrise. Rain misted across the windshield. That's when he noticed a small diner near the highway with a flickering neon sign that read "Open." Inside sat maybe 4 people, a truck driver, an elderly couple sharing pancakes, a nurse still wearing scrubs. And behind the counter was a gray-haired waitress named Margaret. She poured his coffee without asking. "You look tired," she said kindly. Thomas gave a dry smile. "Long week." She glanced at him for a second longer than most people did. "Long life, probably." Something about that answer stayed with him. Over the next few weeks, he kept returning. Same booth, same black coffee. One morning, he arrived after visiting Lucia. Or trying to. She'd been polite at the door of her apartment, but distant. Their conversations now sounded like conversations between coworkers. Careful, efficient, surface level. Afterward, Thomas sat in the diner staring out the window. Margaret eventually walked over and refilled his cup. "You ever notice," she said softly, "people spend half their lives chasing things they think will make them feel safe." Thomas looked up, then spent the second half realizing safety isn't the same thing as happiness. Thomas let out a small breath through his nose. "You always talk like this." She smiled. "Only with customers who look like they need it." For the first time in years, Thomas laughed genuinely. Not loudly, just honestly, and oddly enough, that small moment affected him more than another successful quarter ever had. Winter arrived slowly that year. Thomas began changing in ways almost invisible at first. He stopped taking weekend calls, started walking without headphones, started noticing ordinary things again. children riding bikes, rain on sidewalks, the sound of his own breathing. One evening, he opened an old storage box in the garage. Inside were home videos. Lucy at age 6 painting his necktie with glitter, Eleanor dancing barefoot in the kitchen while cooking pasta. Christmas mornings where nobody looked rushed. Thomas sat on the cold garage floor for hours watching pieces of a life he had technically been present for, but emotionally absent from. And somewhere between those blurry recordings and the silence of that garage, he finally understood something devastating. He had spent decades trying to give his family a better life, while accidentally removing himself from it. Money had protected them from certain hardships, but it could not replace attention, or warmth, or presence. And maybe that was the cruelest part. The people we love often don't need our perfection. They need our time. A few days before Christmas, Thomas drove to Eleanor's apartment. Snow drifted softly against the sidewalks. When she opened the door, she seemed surprised to see him holding nothing but a paper bag from a local bakery. "No speeches," he said carefully. "No big apology tonight." Eleanor stayed quiet. Thomas swallowed. "I just realized I spent most of my life trying not to become my father financially." He looked down briefly and never noticed I was losing the parts of him that actually mattered. Eleanor's eyes softened slightly. "He was always there," Thomas continued. "That's what I remember now. Not the money, not the house. Just him being there." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Eleanor stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." It wasn't a movie ending. There were no dramatic embraces. No instant healing. Just two tired people sitting quietly in a warm apartment while snow fell outside. But sometimes healing begins exactly like that. Quietly. These days, Thomas still works, but differently. He leaves the office early more often, calls his daughter even when conversations feel awkward. Learns recipes Eleanor used to make. Some wounds heal slowly. Some relationships never fully return to what they were, but something inside him changed permanently. He no longer measures wealth by numbers. Now he measures it in mornings that aren't rushed, in conversations that last longer than necessary, in having someone to call when something funny happens, in sitting beside another person without needing to prove anything. And maybe that's the strange truth most people discovered too late. A wealthy life and a full life are not always the same thing. Sometimes the richest moments we ever experience look incredibly ordinary while they're happening. A family dinner, a late night conversation, a child asking you to watch something they made, someone waiting for you to come home. And one day, without warning, those moments become priceless because they can no longer be repeated. So if someone you love is still sitting across the table from you tonight, maybe stay a little longer. Put the phone down. Let the conversation breathe. Because, in the end, the real meaning of wealth may simply be this: having people in your life who still feel close to you long after the world has gone quiet. And if this story reminded you of someone, or maybe reminded you of yourself, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear what wealth means to you now. And if you enjoy stories like this, quiet stories about real life, real people, and the emotions we rarely talk about, subscribe and stay a while. There's more to come.